The Sons of Liberty cry out, "No taxation without representation," as they respond to increased taxes by dumping tea into Boston Harbor on their way to revolution. Though it gets my patriotic blood flowing and has been inspiring for civics lessons and political movements alike, both history and theory suggest that the threat of tax revolt may be a significant barrier for development because building and strengthening state capacity requires raising revenue. In my job market paper, which I call Balancing Purse and Peace, Tax Collection, Public Goods, and Protests, I provide what I understand to be perhaps the first experimental evidence that the threat of tax revolt is a very real contemporary challenge for some poor governments, that public goods provision potentially provide a pathway for peacefully transitioning to a new, higher tax compliance equilibrium, and that social norms in these settings contribute to the stability of low compliance in the absence of public goods, but that they begin to shift their effect as public goods are introduced. Now, two levers supported by the literature and, more importantly, available to policymakers to increase tax compliance are tax collection effort itself and public goods provision. So in my paper, I partner with the National Tax Authority and a local mayor's office of one of the largest cities in Haiti to randomize both in the same setting, allowing me to rigorously answer the research questions: what are the effects of tax collection and public goods, as well as their interaction on both tax revenue as well as on political unrest? To do this, I cross-randomize both tax collection effort and public goods provision for multiple years at scale across the roughly 300 census blocks and 50,000 taxable properties that make up this city of more than 500,000 people. I specifically randomize to whom tax agents hand deliver invoices for property taxes, the principal source of revenue for this local government, as well as the routes taken by a new fleet of vehicles donated to the city to provide door-to-door garbage removal services, the only broadly provided public good in this setting. I follow effects on tax revenue by matching previously siloed administrative data, creating what I understand to be a first of its kind for Haiti individual panel dataset of tax compliance. And I measure effects on political unrest through both a panel survey as well as a series of novel, independently observed metrics. I measure political speech by censusing and geolocating graffiti across the city, and I measure the more violent or disruptive political actions by geolocating barricades constructed and often set on fire during protests in Haiti. My findings are consistent with the historical and broader theoretical literature, but provide novel evidence for the empirical literature of increased tax collection effort causing tax revolt response in terms of both payments falling by half, while self-reported time spent protesting, as well as observed barricade construction, both nearly tripled, and political graffiti doubled and became more negative in tone. On the other hand, my research also yields the novel finding of public goods offering a pathway for balancing purse and peace, increasing tax revenue by more than 25%, while reducing self-reported protesting by half, and almost entirely eliminating the observed barricade construction. And I find evidence that these effects are largely mitigating the adverse effects from tax collection for those who receive both. To experimentally elicit the effects of social norms on tax payments, I introduce an additional level of randomization to my design and informed a subset of households that if they were to pay their taxes, that the mayor would acknowledge this compliance by placing a sign on the exterior of their household. And I find this novel treatment further decreased tax payments by an additional 15%, providing evidence that antisocial punishment is contributing to the stability of the low tax equilibrium. However, this additional negative effect was only the case in areas not receiving public goods. In fact, I find suggestive evidence that when combined with public goods, the effect switches toward the pro-social signaling mechanism, which has previously been identified in the tax literature, suggesting that it is with the provision of public goods that these effects emerge. I'm able to dig deeper into spillover effects and mechanisms by leveraging both additional experimental elements of my design, as well as some rather unconventional quasi-random variation in treatment intensity arising from vehicle breakdowns, hijackings, and other gang activity. And I end with a cost-benefit exercise, which indicates that the public goods intervention does generate positive net revenue for the city and even could plausibly recover the initial startup costs within its first year of operation. Now, taken all together, I bring a novel experimental design to a setting largely absent from the literature, which allows me to provide some of the first experimental evidence that the threat of tax revolt is a very real challenge facing poor governments, and that a sufficient initial investment in salient public goods may provide a pathway for peacefully shifting to a new equilibrium of higher tax compliance and citizen-funded state capacity building. In other words, providing public goods make it possible to balance purse and peace. Thank you so much, and remember to subscribe, there's a bell. Please take a look at my paper. I'd love your thoughts. And remember that I'm on the job market. Cheers.